topic of discussion is financial modeling, and we'll kind of speak about it in the context of community-owned solar projects, which is really the types of projects that most PSEF members are developing. I will just give an overview generally of financial modeling, and then I will pass over to Ali, who is a board member of PSEF, as well as one of the members of our, I think it's been around a year now, financial modeling working group that was set up at the request of PSEF members. So Ali will give us a walkthrough of PSEF's financial model. Financial modeling for community-owned solar projects. So I know this is generally a discussion that a lot of the time when people hear about financial modeling, it kind of puts them on edge a little bit, because it does get pretty technical. It's a lot of sort of spreadsheets, and it can be a little bit intimidating, particularly for those of us who are not so great with financial models and sort of the numbers side of things. It can be a little intimidating. I know it certainly was for me in the beginning. But really what we want to try and do is kind of demystify the process of financial modeling, because it is really an essential one for sort of project development. Ali will really, Ali has sort of provided a great, participated in developing the model, but also is great in just sort of walking through like what is required, why we do this, etc. So one of the big reasons that we need a financial model as community-based solar developers is to really just understand, is this project going to be a financially and economically viable one? You'll hear a lot of the time, does the project pencil? And that's really just kind of getting at, does it make financial sense to proceed with the project? Another reason that we'll need this is because investors will, regardless of whether they are debt financiers or tax equity, and even in the case really of philanthropy, grant funding for projects, a financial model is generally something that everyone will need to see, if they're going to have a stake or provide a stake in your project. So that's another reason that we need one. And then it also just allows us to really optimize the benefits that the project could provide. Playing around with the model allows you to look at, different scenarios. If you're maximizing, things like ownership, for example, you can see all of that through the financial model. So I mentioned that there's PSEF has a financial modeling working group. This was really established because we were hearing from members that this is one aspect of the project development process that, they required a lot of assistance just getting to the stage where, they can put together a model that they can present to investors. So the PSEF financial modeling working group worked to develop a template that is, we want it to be as applicable as possible to different models of community-owned solar and hopefully in the next iterations, other clean energy projects. And it's pretty customizable, but also just very general. And Ali will speak to that. So just very generally, what is a financial model? And this is a tool that sets out the financial plan of a project. And it's really just a framework for, allowing you to estimate what the costs and revenues of a project will be for over the project's lifetime, evaluating the risk and assessing the financial viability of the project. So the financial model will help really with, as I mentioned, sort of just coming down to the decision of whether this is a financially viable project. Through the financial model, you can, you have a picture of what the project will look like from a financial standpoint, which is really important for your investors, for for lenders, to sort of have a sense of, okay, this is when repayment will happen. These are some of the factors that will go into the success of the project, and this is how it'll, impact our investment into the project. Another aspect of what the financial model will allow for is assessing the risks associated with the project. For example, they may be, technical risks such as equipment failures. And, with your financial model, you can include things like equipment reserves, for instance, and mitigate the risks in that way, or cost overruns. What are you going to do in the case where you might have cost overruns? You can think about mitigating factors like insurance, for instance. Like, do you want to get business interruption insurance, and what does that look like for, the outputs for your projects? Another really important factor around the financial model is that it allows for transparency. There's going to be several, stakeholders involved in your projects, from, your site hosts to your lenders to community members. And the financial model really provides a central place where all of these stakeholders can kind of maintain a sense of how the project is expected to perform and what some of the key assumptions are around the project. So it's really facilitates transparency, and as certain things change in your model, if change in your project, that'll be reflected in your financial model, and various stakeholders can sort of stay up to date with that. And then it also kind of allows you to play around with how you might maximize benefits to your community. In the case of most PSEF members, they're developing projects that have a pathway to ownership or are community owned, or are maximizing just the benefits that communities can get. So you can look at what will happen if you, for instance, want to maximize bill savings. How does that impact revenues for your project? So, as much as it can be a little bit of an intimidating tool, it really allows you to achieve a lot of things. Yeah, I'll walk you through in a way that makes sense, but just wanted to highlight that there are, key things that you will see in a financial model. The project specifications, just sort of starting off with what's the location of your project? What's the name of your project? What's the capacity? What are the expected outputs? What are the utility rates? What are your expected savings for subscribers? So capturing all of that, that will just all be in the financial model. And then another sort of key, some key outputs, I guess, or rather, sort of sources and uses will be one of the other things that you'll be able to see when you have in the dashboard or of your financial model. You'll generally have, and you'll want this to be as complete as possible, this sort of overview of what your expected sources of capital are for funding your project. And what the expenses will be. So things like your EPC costs and legal transaction fees and interconnection fees will all be there as complete as possible. And then, what are your sources? So are you trying to finance this project through just debt? Are you financing the project through a combination of debt and tax equity, or, investment tax credits, etc., or other sort of local incentives? That'll all be included in your financial model. And then the model will go into detail on each of these. So things like debt, this will outline your sources and the terms of your debt, how long it'll take to repay it, what is the interest rate, whether it's refinanceable and when you're likely to refinance it. And similarly, for if you are, using tax equity as a part of the project, this will be reflected in the financial model as well. And then, sorry, just quickly going back there, grants and incentives. This is another key aspect that you want outlined. And I'll touch a little bit on the Inflation Reduction Act and how it has created these new sources of financing for community solar projects. But this is also something that you will reflect. I think Ali was mentioning the excitement around, I think it's the low income bonus credits. Those are, all of the things that you will add into the model. It's an extra 10%, for example, for financing through the ITC if you have the low income bonus or other bonuses. So this will all be captured in your financial model. And then, of course, you'll have just pro forma financial statements, which will provide sort of year-on-year financial projections for the project. Okay, so what are we looking at, or what is the financial model for the types of projects that we're developing? Sort of what do we want to see, and what is a good financial model? What is it reflecting for both the developer, which is us, and then the funders, which in some cases is also PSEF. But from a developer standpoint, we always you could be looking at a whole host of things. So, to really have this list, it's not a conclusive list, but just gives a sort of sense of, looking at things like your cash flow. Will there be, sufficient cash flow for the project to be a worthwhile one to continue with? You might want to look at things like meaningful benefits and things like bill savings. Is your project actually going to result in savings for your community, and is it, are those savings meaningful? You want to look at things like the payback period, how long until you pay off all your debt and equity and have revenues sort of coming into the project. And then things like, is there a pathway to ownership, which is something that's really important to a lot of PSEF members. From a funder standpoint, things like the project's internal rate of return are going to be important for investors. And generally, a project IRR of between 10 to 20% is considered a good rate of return. Investors will look at the minimum rate of return, so your sort of annual cash on cash return. We'll look at DSCR, which is the debt service ratio coverage, to ensure that you actually will have enough revenue to cover your debt and to service your debt, like loans, for example. And then, funders will also, in addition to looking at your project holistically, so looking at the project team and things like that, in your financial model, they'll look at lenders will look at your assumptions and, assess whether your revenue, your operating costs and other expense assumptions are actually realistic. And, we'll often ask, what is this based on, or have you factored this or that in? So those are some of the things that, folks will look at. And then, as I mentioned, this is not at all a conclusive list, and it may differ from funder to funder, and it might also differ from community-based developer to community-based developer, because, projects are really developed to prioritize different things. In our cases, sometimes communities want to develop projects in order to really address high project or high energy costs. In other cases, it's really for energy self-sufficiency, and, bill savings might not be that important. So, the financial model really allows you to look at different factors. So cash on cash return. We'll look at DSCR, which is the debt service ratio coverage, to ensure that you actually will have enough revenue to cover your debt and to service your debt, like loans, for example. And then, funders will also, in addition to looking at your project holistically, so looking at the project team and things like that, in your financial model, they'll look at lenders will look at your assumptions and, assess whether your revenue, your operating costs and other expense assumptions are actually realistic, and we'll often ask, what is this based on, or have you factored this or that in? So those are some of the things that folks will look at. And then, as I mentioned, this is not at all a conclusive list, and it may differ from funder to funder, and it might also differ from community-based developer to community-based developer, because projects are really developed to prioritize different things. In our cases, sometimes communities want to develop projects in order to really address high project or high energy costs. In other cases, it's really for energy self-sufficiency, and bill savings might not be that important. So the financial model really allows you to look at different factors. Okay, I wanted to quickly just touch on the Inflation Reduction Act, because there have been considerable changes in the last sort of 2 years since the Inflation Reduction Act was passed. One of which is the ITC, which existed before the Inflation Reduction Act, but has been substantially expanded with the passing of the IRA. They are now not just the sort of standard 30% ITC, investment tax credit, but also additional bonus adders. So, if your project is, qualifies for a low income bonus, that might be an additional 10 or 20% of investment tax credit, as well as, if you meet certain criteria like domestic content, or the project is located in an energy community, you could, stacking up some of these investment tax credits could result in your, project financing of up to 60, and I think 70, up to 70%. I may stand corrected on that one, just through tax credits. So that's, that's pretty, it's a pretty significant shift, because one of the, key issues really with facing community-based solar developers was really accessing different sources of capital. So, to have these new sources of capital through, tax credits is pretty substantial. And then also just quickly touching on the fact that there's also a new mechanism through which folks can now access the investment tax credit through the direct pay mechanism, where certain eligible entities, nonprofits, tax exempt nonprofits, as well as state and local and tribal governments, can now get a check from the IRS directly. So, it does away with the need to have a tax appetite, a tax appetite for, leveraging this ITC. So that is really one of the game changers coming out of the IRA for, financing community solar projects. And then, I just wanted to quickly flag some additional sources of financing as folks are thinking about, financing projects. There's the EPA's Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund program, where recipients were recently announced in the last sort of month or so. There's the Solar for All program, where there's 60 recipients sort of nationwide that will provide access to, financing for low-income solar programs or low-income solar projects, as well as the Clean Communities Investment Accelerator, which establishes like financing and TA hubs for community lenders providing capital. And similarly with the National Clean Investment Fund, this will be sort of direct financing for affordable for projects, clean energy and clean technology projects. So all of this is to say there's going to be a really big influx of capital for community solar projects. I did want to flag that PSEF is a partner in one of the coalitions and is a recipient that will be a recipient of Solar for All financing. So, you know, there'll be CDFIs and other sources of or other sources of or finance providers, and you know, PSEF will be one of those. And then I just had some terms, some key terms that you'll see in financial modeling. I won't go through them. I will spare people going through the acronyms, but they are there. And then also some resources related to financial modeling. But I will now happily hand over to Ali, who will walk us through the PSEF financial model.
Okay, I am going to take you through the PSEF financial model. I'm wondering if anybody in the room already has a project in mind that they may have some details about, like how big is it and how much does it cost? Those are the main questions that I would ask. And if not, if you have a couple of those but maybe need some help figuring out the rest of them, we could kind of make it up as we go along. But does anybody want to volunteer a dream project or a project that they're working on now that we could use to go through the model? Ooh, Noor?
Yeah, I guess I could try to explain the project Reverend Frank Jackson is trying to accomplish.
I love that. How about we do that in the process of I'm going to screen share the model and just start peppering you with some questions, and we'll see if we can fill this out together based on your project. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, let's do that. I'll do my best with all the questions.
Yeah, and we can, as I said before, we can kind of make it up as we go along. Okay, so this right here, this is the dashboard of the 1.0 release of the PSEF financial model. This is an asset of the PSEF members. This is the dashboard. This sheet gets populated. As you can see, there's lots of div zeros and blank cells and not a lot of clear information coming off of this. That's because we haven't put any information into the model yet. The way that the model works is there's a bunch of these summary tabs. There's a portfolio summary that would populate. This would be populated once we put all of our data in. There's a summary financials that would also be populated. All of these things are blank right now. But you can see some of the aspects that Mac was speaking to. We've got our capital sources and our capital uses that will be populated. We've got some tax credit information, and then we've got some ROI, and I think there's probably IRR information about the returns in here too. So we may not get through populating a whole project, but let's go after it and see. So project one, this model is built so that you could maybe finance multiple projects at once, which is what some project developers will do to help cut down on transaction costs. If you're building 2 or 3 at the same time that are about the same speed of construction, that can be helpful. So we'll start with project one. Great. Yeah, Noor, what is the name of your project?
I guess it would be the Building a Better Community Initiative Solar, like array network, okay. Probably solar network.
Ooh, solar. Oh, it looks like that is as many characters as it will let me type in, so we'll call it that. Building a Better. Sorry.
No worries.
Okay, we're going to call it Building a Better for now. So that's good. Okay, what is the DC system size that you guys are thinking of? So that would be the direct current size, the like if you had 500-watt panels and you had 10 of them, it would be a 5-kilowatt system, for example. Do you happen to know the ballpark DC system size?
I don't think we have this information hammered down yet. I think we're still selecting a site. Does that make this not a good project for an example?
A little bit, yes, but you know what? Let's just start dreaming from here.
Okay. I think there is I think one of the sites we have our eye on is 5 acres that we would use.
Ooh, beautiful size. Okay, so 5 acres, and if we assume one kind of safe estimate is 1 megawatt or 5 acres per megawatt. So that maybe means that we could fit a 1 megawatt project on 5 acres. So that would be 1 million. Did I get the right number of zeros? No, I got the wrong number of zeros. There we go. We've got a DC system size. Oh, I forgot to explain the color coding. You'll notice that many of the cells are all different colors. That is on purpose so that we can tell which cells we're supposed to put numbers into and which cells are calculating on their own, because there's a bunch of formulas in here. Like I just highlighted this cell B6, and it will do a calculation for us once we put a number into B4 and B5. A typical, if it was 1 megawatt, a typical AC DC ratio might be like 1.3, which means that we want this number to be that divided by 1.3. I'm not very good at math, mental math, so I did it separately. And that's a very ugly number, so I'm just going to round it to 750 kilowatts AC. So that's going to be our system size. We've got 5 acres, we've got 1 megawatt DC, which is 750 kilowatts AC. It populated our AC-DC ratio. Now this is asking for the production, the annual output of the project. If we've got a 1 megawatt project, let's see, ooh, this is going to be good math for us to calculate. A good ballpark that I use is a solar array is productive for about 5 hours of the day intensely. It's more productive in the middle of the day and a little bit less productive on the tails of the day. But overall, if you multiply the size of the project by 5 hours a day, that will give you the daily output-ish. And then if we multiply that by 365 days in the year, that will give us the annual output. Oh no, it's this is kilowatt hours per year per watt. So then I guess this is just 5 times 365. Okay. You're watching me do mental math here. Hopefully this is fun for all of you guys. So this is sometimes called our production yield ratio, which tells you how productive your solar farm is being. This annual production, this is how many kilowatt hours per year we are producing. And you might have noticed that right over here, in this table, it populated automatically the monthly production. So this is now telling us how many kilowatt hours per month the project is spitting out, which will be important down here in the revenue once we tell the model what the price the utility or the subscribers are paying per kilowatt hour. So that is handy. Okay, so we don't need to fill in, green means it's optional, an optional input. It means that the financial modeling working group who made this made a best guess, but if you have a better guess for what your system's annual degradation is going to be, then you can modify that here. Yeah, Noor, what is your question, thought?
So if this project is not one large array, but let's say it's multiple arrays in different areas, would I sort of put that in as a conglomerate of all the different arrays put together, or would I make those separate projects or tabs?
I think it would probably help to make them separate tabs, depending on how many of them there were.
Okay.
But I think for us, often our lenders want to know things about each site. So for us, we have two projects. We work for the Ho'ahu Energy Cooperative Molokai, and they have two projects going at once. And so the lenders will often ask specific questions about each project, and they like to see it split out. You could aggregate it, but I think because this model is built to have multiple projects, I think it's probably better to split them out.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so now we're gonna have fun over here with project costs. Project costs vary wildly. If we were gonna build this project in Hawaii on the island of Molokai, for example, this project would cost solar only maybe like $5 or $6 million. But because Noor, where do you get a good sense in your location what a good dollar per watt for EPC costs for the building of the project, including equipment, would be?
I'm not sure. Is there somewhere I could like look that up?
Ooh, this is a good question. I feel like, is it ground mounted or carports, do you think? Like, for example, if it's over a parking lot, that would be a lot more expensive. If it's ground mounted, I would guess maybe like $2.50 per watt might be a good guess.
Hmm.
Per
I
watt.
think I'm not sure which one they would pick. It would probably be a mix, but we could just go with one for the sake of the example.
Okay, let's guess that it's 250 a watt. That seems like a good ballpark, but I also don't work in your area, and so it would vary wildly, but you will get that information from your potential installers once you get to that stage, asking for indicative pricing. Interconnection is another one that can vary really wildly. For us in Hawaii, sometimes it's $3 a watt, which is really, really, really expensive. Most places in the continental US, it's like maybe 20 cents, 10 or 20 cents a watt. So we'll middle ground it and put it at 15 cents a watt. So you guys are probably noticing that we've got, I'm filling in the pink or the blue and green, and it's populating the gray over here. Project legal is optional. Sometimes we get pro bono legal work, but sometimes we do not. Noor, do you think you would get pro bono legal work on this one, or you think we should budget in for a lawyer?
I think you should budget in for a lawyer.
Okay, let's put, oh, that's kind of expensive. Let's put $30,000 in for a lawyer. Gets you a nice lawyer. And then a developer fee is really ranges, but let's put often like 10% of the total project cost would be typical. So maybe I'll put 25 cents per watt is the developer fee. And so this might go to the community-based, the cooperative that's developing the project, or if you have a development partner that is doing the development work, that may be a fee that goes to them. Share of transaction costs. These are not going to populate well because we haven't filled in that information into the dashboard. But we will just go ahead and ignore that for now. Sorry, everybody, that we didn't quite have time to fill out the rest. But what would have happened if we had continued to fill this out is we've got some more information that would be filled out about where we're getting our construction loan from, how much money is coming from member equity, and maybe other sources if you have a grant to support your work. This area around incentives could be if your state has a particular incentive, like a grant or upfront money, or an additional tax credit in addition to the federal level one. So Hawaii has a 35% tax credit. So we would put that in here. This subscriber type, this is what subscribers would be paying per kilowatt hour for the project, which may be set by the program that you work in by the state, or you may set it yourself based on what the projects cost. There are more tabs. All of these tabs are fillable, and they continue to populate the rest of the dashboard as you fill in all of them. Let's see, did our dashboard change much at all? No, it did not change much at all because we still have a lot more information to fill in, but you can see our capital uses have started to fill in here. And if we had been able to finish that, then we would have at least a total use here. Some of these questions would ask you, are you selling your investment tax credit or not? Which speaks to what Mac was talking about before about the new options available to projects like ours, and some other questions. This can be very intimidating. I would say maybe in closing, overall, I was pretty new to this work about 5 years ago, and had a lot of really great mentors who helped me figure some of this stuff out in PSEF and outside of PSEF. It is something that requires a lot of attention to detail, and so it can be really intimidating. Like right now, it looks like we made no progress because we only filled in certain parts of it. But if you can stick with it and ask folks for help, and maybe some of you already know lots more than I do, and if so, I'm sorry that you had to watch me struggle through filling this out. But it can be pretty fun and can really get to the meat of why we do the work that we do to bring that money circularly through communities. So I'll stop there. Thanks, guys.